Grass types are commonly not regarded for being very good Pokemon. I don't think anyone is going to disagree with that, because it's just true if we historically look at how they've been tiered. We just can't really reference too many consistently elite grass types. Now, we do have some exceptions, of course. Ferrothorn is going to be the one that immediately jumps to everyone's mind, because that Pokemon has been OU every generation, and it's always been one of the best, like top 10 or so Pokemon. Amoonguss has pretty historically as well been top tier, as has Tangrowth, because they both have Regenerator, they're both very bulky, they both have a great amount of utility moves at their disposal, and as a result, they work really nicely as these long-standing, just nuisances that can constantly disrupt teams. But once you get past them, it kind of starts falling off a pretty big cliff in terms of the ones that are viable. And while we do have a couple new additions this generation, like Meowscarada, Toedscruel, and even Brambleghast, surprisingly, that have found niches in their formats, it's still not looking too great. However, you want to talk about Inu? Oh my lord, we are in the renaissance of grass types, baby! We got a ton of them here. And today I'm going to talk about the most prevalent of them, any of them that are ranked in the VR. As always, if you've been enjoying the content, make sure to subscribe if you're not already subscribed. Leave a like, comment, turn the bell on, join as a member, do all this lovely stuff. Let's get into this. So, we're going to start off at the very top, literally. Abomasnow. This is a new Pokemon that we got at the start of July? Yes. And it's been really good for us. There are two main sets that stand out, and naturally it's two offensive sets. Abomasnow's stats, if you look at them, they do not really lend it to necessarily much of an identity just off stats alone, but you do see it make use of its powerful blizzards, and its pretty good physical coverage, all things considered, to give it a very viable special attacking set where you just try and wall break, or a sword set where you can kind of do a bit of both, where you've got that wall breaking potential, but you also have some sweeping potential with Ice Shard. I'll also mention some set variety here, because yeah, oddly enough, Abomasnow is a weirdly versatile Pokemon. This is probably the set that I've seen the most. If you're just looking for a generic offensive Abomasnow, this works pretty well, Leech Seed being a really cool last option because it lets you try and trade hits versus Blissey a bit better. A lot of the Blissey on ladder right now, and just Blissey in general I should specify, don't have Thunder Wave. And as a result, they don't really have a great way of dealing with an Abomasnow that has Leech Seed. You just affect Blissey with the move, and its Seismic Toss is not going to break you, especially if you have Giga Drain to help support your HP. But of course, there's a couple offshoots to this set here too that are worth talking about. The most notable, of course, just being make this item nice little Icy Rock. This lets you run snow-based teams and gives you an extra 3 turns of your hail. Not hail, your snow. This is actually... Hey, that's an interesting little missed thing. I'm gonna report that after I finish recording this. But this gives you extra turns of snow, helps support Pokemon like Glaceon and Beartic by enabling their abilities for even longer. Now we could even talk about a Jetpack Abomasnow. This is kind of cool just so you can pivot with Leaf Storm. And if we want to talk about other move options, well, probably the most common one would just be Aurora Veil here. Of course, letting you support Snow Sweepers once again, or just giving your team a little bit of extra durability regardless of whether it is a dedicated snow team or not. And I feel like there's another move that I wanted to mention here, but honestly can't really think of it right now. There are a couple moves that you can consider too, like you've got Earth Power and Focus Blast. Both those are really good for steel types. It's just the thing with Inu right now. Since we don't have many common steel types, the most common being Magneton, which, yeah, Earth Power is very valid for, it's usually better to run something like Leech Seed or Aurora Veil here, because Blissey is viewed as a bit more problematic, or you're just looking at supporting your teammates being as more effective. And a Terra Water, really for this set, is just because there's not really anything else you'd rather run. Grass is fine. It's generally, honestly, a decent defensive typing, though I would say Grass wants more HP. And I prefer running this because it lets you always outspeed Clawitzer. You also get the jump on Modest Glaceon, which is pretty useful. And if you know about Swords Dance, this is another set where there's a decent amount of versatility, starting with the Terra type. Now, Earthquake, I think powering that up with Terra Ground is quite good. It lets you get past Quillfish a lot more effectively, even something like a Muck, if they're trying to switch into you, predicting you to just be the special attacking set. being able to slam it with +2 Earthquake, or even just unboosted Earthquake if you want to Terra Ground immediately. That is pretty useful overall for a team. I also think Terra Poison is a pretty useful Terra typing. Terra Poison gives you a much better matchup against almost every like actual response to you. You talk about Quillfish, it can't Barb Barrage you anymore. It can't Toxic you anymore. You look at Kroken's Hisui and Sneasel as well. Now you wall their stab attacks. That's really, really useful, in addition to just having a resistance now to any choice-locked fighting types stab move. I don't think anyone's going to disagree on how useful that's going to be. But then also, you've got, for move pool, a weirdly decent amount of options too. And when I say weirdly decent, I mean there's like one other option that I'd ever run. You've got Ice Spinner here. Also, disregard this real quick. Okay, good. Just had to make sure that was set right. You've got Ice Spinner that was an option. And the reason that Ice Spinner is actually kind of decent is because, well, sometimes Abomasnow is just not going to be able to be that late game sweeper. Maybe you want to have it dedicated to a bit more of a wall breaking role. And frankly, yeah, sometimes you just need the power of Ice Spinner, because if you've got Ice Shard, there are a couple Pokemon that do become a little bit harder to beat down. You look at, like, maybe an opposing Appleton, for example. I mean, yeah, it's got Terra Steel, and it's probably going to burn that anyway and become weak to your EQ, but Ice Spinner helps you beat that down if it can't use its Terra. You also want to look at maybe a Pokemon like Drifblim, where, okay, what if it starts trying to Will-O-Wisp and Strength Sap you? Well, having Ice Spinner instead of Ice Shard might actually just let you pop it immediately. Same with, like, Lurantis. Maybe Lurantis is going to try and, you know, do something with Leaf Storm and Terra Fire Terra Blast. And you don't want to have to play around that initial Leaf Storm at all, so you just want to immediately hit it for more damage. I do think there's at least some appeal to this move. As a result, hey, let's bring it up. Now we move on to Appleton. Now, funny enough, I would say Specs Appleton is just its best set at this point. As we all know, if we watched the video where I get called out on ladder for running a supposedly bad set, Specs Appleton is just very, very, very good right now. I think offensive Appleton in general is very good. Because NU, much like with Abomasnow, how we talked about with its special attacker set, doesn't have steel types. And so this dual stab, you don't even need coverage a lot of the time. You can just keep firing off these really strong moves. And even if you do run into a steel type, I mean, what are the ones that you're running into? You think Magneton's taking a hit too? Well, I got news for you, pal, it's not. You run into a Tinkatuff? Well, Bozo. You ran into Tinkatuff, that's kinda just tough. And it's something like Assault Vest Electros, which is a pretty good mid-ground Pokemon into a lot of special attackers. I mean, if it doesn't have Terra Steel activated, it's taking so much. And so you're really pretty effective into any matchup that's just not Blissey. But what if I told you there's a set that makes you good into Blissey? Recycle. Where you retain a lot of your defensive power, because you still run HP, and this EV spread is pretty just bog fill-in, you know, standard type stuff. You could run some special bulk, I'm sure. I just don't have a good EV spread on hand. But look at what this set lets you do. You've got the Recycle, you've got Eject Pack, Draco Meteor. You can consistently pivot out on Pokemon like Blissey that you're otherwise never going to get past. And now you keep them from draining momentum on your side of the field. Because you don't have to worry about them switching in and then immediately being able to set up Rocks or T-Wave or maybe even Heal Bell. You just pivot out into your physical attacker and say, oh, hello there. I am now going to beat you down. So you completely flip the matchup on its head. But hey, we gotta still talk about the good old set. Just adorable, especially if it's Appleton. I feel like we don't see this set too much anymore, because it frankly is pretty bad, like Blissey, about draining your team's momentum. Now, also just like Blissey, it's still very effective in spite of that. But people like the other sets because they still give you a lot of what those... about what especially the defensive set would give you defensively. Like, you're still checking most of what you need to. A little bit more aligned to Terra, of course, to do so, but you still are able to, say, take hits from a Pokemon like Jolteon or Pyroar. This set, though, much more consistent just because of how much bulkier it is. Dragon Tail is also potentially really useful into something like, say, a Coiled to Dunsparce if it's not Terra Fairy, or Electros. even better into Jolteon like we specified because you're so much bulkier. So with Thunderbolt, if they do predict your use of Terra Steel correctly, it's at least a little bit less dreadful. And then you've got the little option of Dragon Pulse instead of Dragon Tail. What I've kind of felt when using this Pokemon is that if I've got spikes, then I do really want Dragon Tail because there's not any reason to not take advantage of that. Get your hazards up and just start phasing. Appleton's really hard to OHKO, especially if you've got the option to use Terra. Because a lot of the Pokemon that would OHKO you, they really rely on you not being able to Terra and deny them. Because some of them are choice locked, like Hisui and Sneasel. Maybe you run into a choice band one, and they try to gunk shot you, well, whoopsies, I went for Terra Steel, and now I can just hit you. So, it's really effective at just shuffling teams around, but if you don't have a Spiker, Dragon Pulse is pretty nice. And I'm trying to, there are a couple Pokemon you do actually sometimes want Pulse for. Funny enough, one of those Pokemon is opposing Appleton. If you're running into like a Specs Appleton, or even a Recycle variant, maybe you want Dragon Pulse to be able to, you know, beat them 1v1 if they can't Terra. Like, maybe you need Dragon Pulse for, I don't know, where's another one? Hisui and Sneasel just to hit it on the switch. Or like Croak as well. Sometimes that extra damage is a bit better than just, you know, shuffling. But, like I said, Dragon Tail release, so also Bulk Pursuing is a good mention here. Now they could Terra, obviously, on you, but hey. We can't win them all. Also, you'll beat Bulk Pursuing anyway with like Terra Steel plus Apple Acid, but yeah. If they can't use Terra Fairy by that point in the game, maybe you want to shuffle them out for now and just force that, you know, a Violite Reliant Mon to take a little bit of extra Hazards chip. Now we go to Cacturne, another very, very versatile Pokemon. I didn't include a Swords Dance set here, frankly, I just don't think it needs to be mentioned here. But even just this one set here has quite a bit of versatility. Now, I do think you can run a slower EV spread. That's what I want to talk about first. While Cacturne is not a bulky Pokemon, it offers a very unique defensive profile still with this typing and its ability. I mean, being able to actually check Bruxish, Clawitzer even, the Mon that has 70, 60, 60 defenses is really, really funny. But I went for just showing you the offensive EV spread because frankly, this is usually what you see anyway. So, I wanted to talk about it. If you're going to go slower, I think you usually would run around something for speed creeping Sandaconda. This is technically the minimum you could go to, though I would maybe consider running a little more. Even like outspeeding Drifblim and sitting around this 200 spot, where you technically can go down here, but again, be careful of a Drifblim maybe that's running some speed. Sandaconda sometimes creeps for Drifblim, so maybe you want to be careful against that too. But those are like spots you can EV for, and then you could of course get some HP investment. Helps you a little bit versus, say, maybe a Bruxish goes for Terra Dark Crunch versus you. Well, hey, if you got a little bit of investment in HP, maybe you're not as worried about that. So that's kind of like what I like to do. In terms of versatility with the moveset, you got a good amount. These two moves are generally going to be always on your set, but you can run here like Spiky Shield with Leftovers, for example. I personally like Boots because it makes me feel a lot safer into hazards. So the thing with Cacturne, of course, it kind of sucks to set spikes and then remove them. Like, it really does. And so I like to have Boots so that I can have, say, like a Defog Scyther on my team, for example. And then not feel like I need to have hazards removed if the opponent also starts stacking up their own spikes. My Cacturne isn't going to be getting weakened every time it comes out. It gives you a little bit of insurance, but if you do just not care having to defog your hazards away, you're just okay with that. I do think Spiky Shield and Leftovers is pretty cool. Of course, the big reason for that being you can scout out any choice item user, like, say, maybe there's a Bruxish in front of you and you want to see if it's going to stand and attack you with Ice Fang. Maybe there's a Hazel in front of you and you want to see, okay, are you seeing me? You can get a little extra chip that way as well. Maybe you need to scout out for a Terra from something, like maybe you're worried Lurantis is Terra Fire instead of Terra Electric. That's a perfectly valid reason to as well. You could even just want to get some chip on something that's U-turning. Like, maybe there's a Defog Braviary that thinks you're going to switch, so it U-turns. Brave Bird obviously would do the same thing. You know, it OHKOs you. And Spiky Shield would get the recoil there too, but that's kind of just the justification for that slot. Sucker Punch as well. Still a really good move here, but it does mean you have to run instead of Modest. You'd be going like with a Rash nature. I say Rash instead of Mild because Bruxish is usually what you'd be thinking about this mon checking, or like a Sandaconda, switching into its Earthquake. So you don't want to be taking too much more damage from those moves. And then another Terra type that I can mention real quick. Other than Poison, you got a couple. Ghost is still fine too. Instead of just being immune to CC, you resist it, but you also still resist. Or no, instead of being resistant, like you are with Poison to CC, you're immune to it. And you still retain that Gunk Shot resistance too, which is useful for Hazel and Croak. Another option is Fairy, which, again, you're talking about trying to patch up that fighting weakness, even patches up the bug weakness. Being weak to Poison's kind of bad, but, you know, you take what you can get. The main reason for Fairy, I would say, is Clawitzer. You are a lot better versus it. Think about it. Immune to Water Pulse, because you got Water Absorb. Now immune to Dragon Pulse, because of your Terra. Now resistant to Dark Pulse. So Clawitzer's, if it's going to want to predict Cacturne to come in, yeah, it can still just hit you with, like, Dark Pulse. It's probably doing, like, 35. But maybe they're going to try it out, start predicting you, and go for, like, Flash Cannon or Sludge Bomb. So, it's a cool tech. Now when we talk about Lurantis, y'all know what this mon does. This is the only set it runs. There is no real reason to deviate from this. The main reason being Lurantis without Terra Blast is just so much worse off coverage-wise. Not like we have a ton of fire types, but literally any fire type will wall you if you deviate and run like Pollen Puff. Like, this would be what we'd have to run otherwise. This also means any flying type is going to have its way with you, other than Bombardier, but even then, Pollen Puff isn't really doing damage to Bombardier. And without Terra Blast as well, you lose a lot of the ability to, you know, flip the script on certain Pokemon. So maybe you want to Terra Blast Electric Driftblim, maybe you want to Terra Blast Fire a Terra Steeled Electros. That's really why we always run Terra Blast, because there's so many Pokemon that if they Terra, they're incredible in the Lurantis, and even many that don't need to Terra to beat this Pokemon. I'll mention Terra Blast Fire real quick though. If we think about a lot of Pokemon that maybe come in on Lurantis, a good amount of them can be Terra Steel, and Fire just means that you boost up alongside them, because let's look through them. A lot of them are ones that may set up on you. Coil Electros, Bulk Up Grimmsnarl before it was banned, even Terra Steel Mesprit with those combined mystical power sets. This Lurantis is going to muscle through Mesprit. It'll only take some time. And then another option of Terra Fire, what it can offer to you, is a much better Jolteon matchup. Now, me personally, I would probably always go specially defensive, or at least try and justify going specially defensive on such a set. The cool thing there, right? Jolteon normally is going to have to Terra Ice to beat a Lurantis, so you're weak to Fire once you do that, but Thunderbolt does so much more in that matchup for Jolteon. Because if you think about Terra Electric Lurantis, yeah, you resist T-Bolt, but Terra Blast Ice is a little weaker versus you compared to just Stab Thunderbolt. So this set does take more from Jolteon's normal stab. I think you do, as a result, want to invest in the defense that Jolteon's hitting you. It just optimizes that matchup as best as you can get it. And now, let's talk about the book, or as I put it, Jirachi at home. I'm not a huge fan of this Pokemon. We remember the live where we were trying to win with Sawsbuck. It did not go too well. But it is a pretty good matchup fisher, I would still say. I don't have good EVs put here. You want to be able to invest in such a way that Substitute is actually giving you some leverage around, for example, Sandaconda. But what I'm trying to show off is the set, right? So your whole thing is you're trying to maybe sub up thanks to Terra Ghost versus choice-locked fighters. And then you look to get your Trailblaze boosts primarily, because that's what's letting you get Headbutt. You just Headbutt flinch through literally everything that would try and check you. Of course, something like Driftblim is going to be a little annoying if you can't get sub-up versus it. Like if it's Air Slash, then you kind of just hold the L there, but otherwise you're honestly pretty good at beating down most Pokemon. It is still weak to Priority, so it's not the best Pokemon. And as you can see with these next few, we are kind of in Nichermon territory, but I do want to talk about these Mons, because I think they all still offer something kind of unique to the tier. And Sawsbuck certainly offers something to this tier. It also is pretty effective, though, at its matchup fishing, because, I mean, look, there's no steel types, at least naturally, that you see on a common game-to-game basis. So, hey, you're often, like, pretty capable of flinching through mons, because a lot of them aren't resisting Headbutt. So, fewer turns that you need to flinch to be able to beat them. And then next up is Lilligant, another Pokemon we used in Alive, and it was certainly a Pokemon that we used in Alive, but this 3 attacks Quiver Dance set, it gives you the best coverage possible, only leaving you truly walled by steel types, and since those aren't too common, it's pretty effective. You just need that 1 turn to quiver, and then hope you still have your Terra. If you don't have it, then flying types will also give you hell, but you have coverage for them. Pollen Puff gives you coverage for whatever grass types you may encounter, like Appleton and company, and Terra Blast Rock. Not only does it let you hit flying types, and bug types, I should actually specify there, but it makes you resistant to poison, so maybe matching up against Muck is a little less dire. You know, if they're like Zen Headbutt, Poison Jab 2 attacks, or not 2 attacks, 2 non-attacking moves, then it gets to be a little bit easier. So, there's a lot of appeal to this set, and I think if Oricorio ever leaves Inu, such as potentially to a tier shift, it's looking like it could rise to RU off of viability alone. Hey, maybe this mon steps up in place. And then we got 2 truly niche mons. Leafeon here. All we've really seen this mon get used on is, like, offense. So you've got this Trailblaze Terra Fire set, because grass and fire coverage, pretty good. And then an alternative is, if you're on this, let's say, Sun, then you get Synthesis there, and you run Adamant. We just don't really see HO with Leafeon get used a ton, and this mon on the viability rankings thread, I'll be honest, it was originally added due to like 1 team that was effectively using it, but hey, that 1 team showed how good it could be. And I think it even got a little NUPL usage too, so not a bad mon. It's just, again, it's very hard to justify consistently. And then there's Thwackey. Thwackey is a Pokemon. We don't have grassy terrain teams getting a ton of use, although you do have Unburdened Drifblim, you do have, like, you can do Grassy Seed Mesprit or, like, Farigiraf on some of those bulkier setup sets. And it's not bad, but it's hard to rate Thwackey too highly, or even just too accurately at the moment, because of how uncommon those builds are. We still have to wait and see if they're going to truly, like, take off before we get an accurate placement for the dual-stick-wielding Monkey of Doom. I think that's about it for me this video. I hope y'all enjoyed. Like we said in the beginning, grass types, historically not that great. But right now in Inu, I mean, this is kind of incredible. What is this, 6 different ones? 7? 7 different grass types that are all, you know, ranging from very good to, hey, pretty alright in this tier. Which I think is always really cool. It's very fun to see traditionally not great, you know, either Pokemon or even just typings come to the forefront of a metagame. And I do believe that the new DLC model that Pokemon is employing does allow for that a bit more, because you have more distinct metas that we can look at now, as we get, you know, waves of new Pokemon being introduced / reintroduced into our tiers. I hope y'all found this informative, enjoyable, entertaining, persuasive, whatever other adjectives you want to use there. Now we'll catch you in the next video. Peace.